Hello, this is Max. Today, there's a story about a young girl who had an affair with her neighbor, but in the end, it all turned into a tragedy. You can subscribe to the channel after watching. It helps us a lot in realizing the content. The film opens with Martin introducing himself during a baking session. He shares his background as a former Parisian who relocated to the Normandy village. Martin then brings over freshly baked bread to his wife, Valerie, at their bakery, but she notices that the bread is burnt. Concerned, she questions Martin about the situation. He explains that he's preoccupied with their neighbor Charlie's well-being. In response, Martin pays a visit to Charlie's house. There, he witnesses Charlie burning belongings belonging to Gemma in his front yard. Among these items, Charlie retrieves Gemma's diaries and confides in Martin that he can't bring himself to read them due to the emotional weight. As Charlie goes inside to fetch a drink, Martin discreetly pockets Gemma's diaries. Back at his own home, Martin delves into Gemma's diaries, discovering her account of her marriage to Charlie. The entries describe their life in London, their deep connection, and some of Gemma's hesitations, particularly concerning Charlie's ex-wife. The diaries also recount their move to Normandy, where Martin lives as their neighbor. At a meal with his family, Martin engages his wife, Valerie, and son, Julian, in a game of guessing the names of their neighbors. Martin reveals that their neighbors are Charlie and Gemma Bovary, a coincidence he finds amusing due to its connection to Flaubert's Madame Bovary, set in Normandy. He notes that Flaubert penned the novel in the same region. Later, Gemma and Charlie visit Martin's bakery, where Gemma inquires about a bread variety. Martin explains it's a grains de tournesol, and a woman named Wizzy clarifies that it means sunflower. Gemma reveals their recent move from London and introduces themselves to Wizzy. As Gemma tastes the bread, Martin watches her closely. Another scene shows Martin crossing paths with Gemma in a field while walking his dog, Giss. They chat while strolling through the field, and Gemma seems to enjoy the interaction. As they part ways, Gemma gazes intently at Martin with a smile. On another occasion, Charlie seeks Martin's assistance with an electricity issue, which Martin swiftly fixes. He advises them to update the wiring due to its age and joins them for a drink. Valerie also joins the gathering. Throughout their conversation, Martin's attention repeatedly shifts to Gemma. Out of nowhere, a rat startles Gemma. She openly expresses her aversion to rats and considers using poison against them. Martin, however, advises against this idea, concerned that it might harm her dog. Subsequently, Gemma pays a visit to Martin's bakery. She repeatedly inquires about the name of a particular bread displayed on the counter. Eventually, Martin suggests teaching Gemma the bread-making process. As he guides her through the steps, his gaze is fixed on Gemma. This intensified focus continues when Gemma takes off her sweater due to the heat, and Martin agrees with her while his attention remains on her. While Martin is at his friend's Calva field, Gemma appears with her dog one afternoon. Their interaction starts with Martin dropping his book, Madame Bovary, as he attempts to pet her dog. He shares his admiration for the book with Gemma, leading to a conversation about various topics. They discuss the previous night's rain, Gemma's roofing issues, and the challenges of country life. Martin playfully suggests that one needs strength for Calva to endure, and he invites Gemma to join him for a drink, which she readily agrees to. Later, Gemma encounters Wizzy at Martin's bakery, and Wizzy introduces her husband, Mark. Following their introduction, Mark invites Gemma to dine at their home. During the dinner at Wizzy and Mark's house, Martin's focus remains largely on Gemma. As the evening progresses, Wizzy takes Gemma on a tour of their house, offering suggestions for rearranging the living room. While guiding Gemma, Wizzy tactlessly comments on her weight, which Gemma reluctantly acknowledges. In response to Wizzy's comment, Gemma initiates a regimen of running and exercising to shed some pounds. On a subsequent day, she crosses paths with Martin, who inquires about her absence from the bakery. Gemma explains her dieting efforts, prompting Martin to mention a low-calorie bread option. However, Gemma declines the offer and bids farewell. As she starts walking away, she suddenly cries out in pain, claiming there's a wasp on her back. Gemma implores Martin to assist her, leading him to unzip the back of her clothing to remove what turns out to be a bee. However, Gemma remains in considerable discomfort. Martin suggests that there might be venom in her skin that needs to be extracted. Gemma asks Martin to perform the extraction, which he ultimately does. Just as he finishes, a man named Herb arrives on the scene and takes charge. Martin explains the situation to Herb while Gemma loses consciousness. Subsequently, Herb and Martin transport Gemma to a clinic where a doctor administers antihistamine due to the anaphylactic shock she experienced. On the journey back to her house, Gemma rests her head on Martin's shoulder. Following this event, Wizzy and Mark pay a visit to Gemma and Charlie's residence. Gemma guides Wizzy around the house, and Wizzy continuously praises Gemma's improvements to the place. Wizzy also shares a magazine with Gemma, using it as a reference for design ideas. Wizzy then introduces her friends, Pandora and Patrick, to the magazine. To Gemma's surprise, she recollects a past relationship with Patrick and how he cheated on her with Pandora. During a visit to the town market, Martin is seen smoking outside his bakery. His attention is drawn to Gemma walking on the opposite side of the market. Martin also notices Herb's presence. He continues observing as Gemma and Herb cross paths and engage in conversation. After their talk, Gemma walks away, leaving Herb behind. Valerie approaches Martin, mentioning that she's been trying to get his attention. She playfully questions why he's been so focused on Herb and teases if he's now interested in men. Subsequent to this, as Gemma dedicates herself to her design work, Charlie approaches her with news of an upcoming dinner party they will be hosting. Despite Gemma's reluctance to entertain visitors, Charlie remains insistent. In due course, Gemma heads to a grocery store to purchase wine for the occasion. There, she unexpectedly encounters Herb, who suggests a more suitable wine option. Herb extends an invitation for Gemma to visit his house, which she ultimately agrees to. On the road, Martin is driving when he spots Gemma driving her car. He attempts to greet her, but Gemma doesn't notice him. He continues to observe as Gemma arrives at Herb's house. Curious, Martin follows her and waits outside Herb's residence. Within, Herb gives Gemma a tour, during which he watches her intently. Outside, Martin tries to reassure himself that Gemma and Herb are merely enjoying a friendly drink, not engaging in anything romantic. During the progressing dinner party later that evening, Gemma attends to their guests while they engage in conversation. Throughout the evening, Martin's attention remains focused solely on Gemma as she moves around the dining area. When she sits beside him, Martin closely observes her. It's during this interaction that Martin spots a conspicuous kiss mark on Gemma's neck after she adjusts her hair. Taking his dog guess, Martin heads to a public trash bin to dispose of garbage. There, he notices Herb standing next to his car, engaged in a phone call. After Herb finishes his conversation, Martin throws away his garbage and attempts to strike up a conversation with Herb, who is also discarding rubbish. Martin watches as Herb drives away and subsequently observes Gemma leaving her house, dressed up. At Herb's residence, Gemma and Herb thoroughly enjoy each other's company. However, their moment is interrupted by a ringing telephone. Herb answers the call, prompting Gemma to pause. Following his conversation, Gemma expresses a desire to leave, but Herb persuades her to stay. As the night progresses, they dance together, seemingly losing themselves in the moment. On another morning, Gemma visits Martin's bakery to purchase bread. Martin inquires about Charlie, to which Gemma reveals he's in London. After making her purchase, Gemma departs, inadvertently leaving behind her croissant. Martin notices and takes the initiative to deliver it to her house. There, he spots Herb's presence and eavesdrops on a conversation between Gemma and Herb about their future. Herb expresses a desire for Gemma to leave Charlie and build a life together with him. Subsequent to this, Gemma informs Charlie that she's going for a walk. Outside, Martin tends to his plants, while Julian approaches him asking for money for books. Gemma emerges from her house again, accompanied by Carrington and dressed more elegantly. Julian's interruption draws Martin's attention away from Gemma, and he eventually provides the money for Julian's books. As Gemma arrives at Herb's residence, she secures Carrington at the gate and switches her footwear from boots to heels. After knocking, Herb welcomes her in, and they once again relish their time together. During their encounter, they accidentally break a Cupid figurine. Herb hesitates, but Gemma suggests that Charlie can repair it, allowing them to continue. Herb agrees to this arrangement. Later, Gemma buys bread from Martin's bakery and mentions her plans to travel to London for a change of scenery. Upon Gemma's departure, Valerie confides in Martin, expressing her suspicions of an affair due to Gemma's newfound happiness. Back at her own house, Gemma discovers a farewell letter from Herb. Attempting to contact him, Gemma finds herself unable to reach him. Consequently, she decides to visit Herv's house. However, just before she enters, she receives a message from Herv explaining his inability to join her in London because he has to go to Paris. Following this, Herv's mother visits Gemma's house and encounters Charlie. She inquires about a Cupid figurine, but Charlie informs her that it's not there. After her visit, Charlie confronts Gemma regarding the figurine. This exchange leads to Gemma suggesting they have a serious conversation. Charlie becomes angry and eventually leaves Gemma, packing his belongings. Martin takes care of Carrington, bringing the dog back to Gemma after finding it alone in the field. Gemma invites Martin inside, showing him a note from Herv's mother requesting the figurine's return. With Martin's assistance, Gemma drafts a response. Throughout this interaction, Martin's attention remains fixed on Gemma. Their conversation is momentarily disrupted by a rat, which Martin swiftly deals with. Upon seeing Gemma using rat poison, Martin expresses his disapproval. Gemma changes the topic to ask for Martin's help with the letter. He informs her that he'll need a few days to complete it. Afterward, Gemma visits Wizzy's house to collaborate on their project. There, she comes across Patrick, and Wizzy attempts to introduce them, only to realize that Gemma and Patrick are already acquainted. While they work together, Patrick engages Gemma in conversation and eventually invites her to join him for a meal. Meanwhile, Morton, who had gone to the church hoping to meet Gemma, spots her and Patrick sharing a kiss in the middle of the street. Later on, while tending to her house repairs, Gemma discovers the mended Cupid figurine in her shed. She calls Charlie to return home. Gemma later offers Martin an apology for not showing up at the church and invites him for a drink. During their conversation, Gemma deduces that Martin was the author of the farewell letter from Herv. Martin suggests that Gemma fears her life might mirror the events of Madame Bovary. Gemma retorts that she's not Madame Bovary and has control over her life. Their exchange escalates into a soft kiss. On another day, Martin delivers bread to Gemma's doorstep. As he knocks, Patrick appears, offering the bread in a basket with Gemma's name on it. Patrick enters, attempting to persuade Gemma, who declines and refrains from revealing Charlie's impending return. Meanwhile, Charlie arrives in a cab and enters their house. Martin is busy in his yard when Charlie calls out, informing him of an incident involving Gemma. Rushing inside, Martin finds Gemma lifeless on the kitchen floor. Later, at Wizzy's birthday celebration, Martin learns from a friend that Gemma choked to death due to a piece of bread. During Gemma's funeral, Martin confides in Charlie, admitting he feels responsible due to the bread delivery. However, Charlie counters that he might bear the blame. Charlie arrives at their house and reveals witnessing Patrick harassing Gemma. Enraged, Charlie confronts Patrick physically. In the midst of their altercation, Patrick explains that he's not at fault. The truth emerges. While attempting to persuade Gemma to come with him, she chokes on a piece of bread. Patrick performs an abdominal thrust to aid her, but Charlie misinterprets the situation and intervenes, inadvertently causing Gemma's demise. At the funeral, Martin also observes her placing flowers. The film concludes with Julian informing Martin that someone has moved into Charlie and Gemma's former house. The new resident, named Kalinina, initially thought to be Russian, turns out to be a local French person with no connection to Anna Karenina. Intrigued, Martin introduces himself to the new neighbor and learns of the misunderstanding. If you are interested in such films, please proceed to the next video on the screen and also share your thoughts about this film in the comments. Give us a like and subscribe. Goodbye.